This week's extract from St. Matthew's Gospel contains three different parables, and in terms of the number of words and level of explanation, to the disciples at least, the parable of the Darnel, a form of ryegrass and very much a weed, is dominant. I would like to focus, however, on the other two parables, the mustard seed and the yeast. Whilst the parable of the Darnel tells us something of the judgments at the end of time, the other two are more concerned with the nature of the church as the expression of the kingdom of heaven, and how we are called to work to establish that kingdom in this world. I actually remember from my school days, believe it or not, how we were encouraged to grow mustard and cress, to learn something about the growth process. It is hard to relate the inch-tall growth that we produced, if we were very lucky, with a shrub large enough to bear the weight of birds, even small ones. But this is what a mustard seed can achieve. A mature mustard tree 6 to 20 feet tall, with a spread of 20 feet. It is this image of how something tiny can achieve so much that is the one on which we need to focus. Christ is very clear in different places in the Gospel that the kingdom of heaven, represented by the church, must be a sign. More than this, it must be a visible sign. Elsewhere in the Gospel, the church is urged to be a city on a hilltop, visible to all and from a great distance. And this is also a key point in the parable of the mustard seed. The seed, the small beginning the disciples will become, must grow until it is visible to all. The kingdom of heaven then begins small. At least its presence in the world is small at first. A handful of followers, initially cowering in Jerusalem, until the Spirit brings them courage. But it is to grow, not just to be visible, but to spread throughout the world. The parable of the yeast works in parable with that of the mustard seed, though the emphasis is subtly different. Although the term leaven, elsewhere in the New Testament, is sometimes used to refer to an evil influence, gradually corrupting everything it comes into contact with, it is quite clear that the yeast or leaven here in this passage refers to the presence of the kingdom of heaven in the world. As with the parable of the mustard seed, there is a comparison within this gospel that is not immediately clear. We are told that the yeast is added to 3 measures of flour. It's useful to get some idea what sort of quantity this actually is. Whilst we cannot actually be totally certain what is meant by a measure, it is most likely that this is equal to a quantity known as an ephah, which is equivalent to about 22 litres, or about 11.5 kilos, or 25 pounds for my age group. 3 measures of flour, then, is approximately 35 kilos, or 75 pounds. So we have a very small amount of yeast permeating a very significant amount of flour, just as the kingdom of heaven is intended to permeate humanity. Whilst looking at definitions, it might be useful to define exactly what is meant by the term kingdom of heaven, as this is a major theme of Jesus' preaching throughout Matthew's Gospel. It is not to be confused with another place to which we aspire. Indeed, it is best considered as not being a place at all. It is better to think of the kingdom of heaven as a process, a chain of events by which God asserts his place in the world of men and acts as its loving Father. In Jesus' time, this is a reassertion of the kingdom, the major element of which is his own mission or ministry on earth. The message of salvation that he brings therefore becomes identified very closely with the process of restoration of the kingdom of heaven. Both of the parables, the mustard seed and the yeast, are therefore descriptions of the mission being handed to the infant church. It is to grow from small beginnings, to become a sign in and to the world. The mustard tree, or the city on the hilltop, and to permeate all mankind as the yeast permeates the flour. Together, these two extracts from the Gospel become the mission statement of the Church, summarised again at the end of Matthew's Gospel with the words, "Go therefore, make disciples of all nations, baptize them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teach them to observe all that I have commanded you." The parable of the mustard seed and the parable of the yeast are the signs that this can be achieved. So what do we take from this in our present day and age? Is the city still visible on the hill? Does the kingdom of heaven still permeate all mankind? Sadly, it is not possible, in all honesty, that these statements are true today. The sign has been obscured by other things in society, and the kingdom does not reach far too many people. We cannot, however, say that the church has failed, because we are the church, and we are still here. Our task now is once again to become the visible sign to the world. Re-establish, if necessary, the city on the hill, so that it cannot be hidden. Preach the words of Christ, so that they can spread ever further throughout mankind. If we feel unable, too small, ineffectual to succeed, we only remind ourselves of the word of Christ. If we're as small as a mustard seed, we have it in us to grow into a tree, visible all to see. We can be the yeast, small in amount perhaps, but it works its way into the wider body of people and brings them back to Christ. We should remember that he did not choose professors or kings or generals to lead his church. It was ordinary people like us, fishermen, tax collectors, not the intellectual of the day, but ordinary folk. They did it once. We can do it again. We can become that small amount, that small presence in the world that is the kingdom of heaven, so that we can help it to spread, to permeate the world, become once again that wonderful sign of God's love with us, that city on the hilltop that cannot be hidden, the love of God shining out for all to see. We may be small, but we can begin in our small way to rebuild what has disappeared from our modern society. We cannot be too small. That mustard seed is so tiny. The tree is so big. The comparison is valid. We will and can and must succeed. In the name of the Father, of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.